Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today on how to plan and build engagement studio programs for events. We're seeing a good few folks dropping in already, so if you're just joining, welcome. Come in, take a seat. Haha. We will be starting very soon, maybe 2 minutes, 3 minutes past the hour, because we've got 180, maybe 190 registrants and some joining from all over the world. Very interesting to know where you're joining from. Feel free to drop it in the chat. We'd love to hear from you. Do let us know if you have any issues accessing screen or the screen share, or you can't hear myself or Triana. Triana, you're okay? You can hear us okay?
I can hear you fine. I can see that someone is saying they can't hear you.
Yeah.
But I can hear you all right.
Cool. Kai heard us at least. He's joining from Massachusetts. Welcome, Kai. Welcome, Monique from Virginia. My brother lives just outside of Leesburg, a lovely part of the world. Hey, Tamsin. We've got Rosalind from Cardiff. Welcome. Cecilia's in from Massachusetts as well. Welcome. We're really looking forward to getting going on the content. We've built this out over the last month or so, but it's kind of been an idea that's been gestating at MarCloud for quite some time, to make sure that we're talking a lot more about what we know and helping folks like you join in to learn today to kind of build up your knowledge of the account engagement system, the marketing cloud system in general, and everything under the kind of Salesforce for marketing banner. Hey, John, so you're down from Virginia as well. Yeah, Leesburg is a nice town. Loudoun County is someplace I want to get to at some point in time. Yeah, look, we should kick off. Welcome, everybody. Let's call this the official start for how to plan and build an engagement studio program for events. We have a great session prepped and will be delivered by our senior lead consultant, Triana Jarman. I'm your host. My name is Owen. I lead the sales team, the marketing team, and the business development team at MarCloud. Used to work at Salesforce, very familiar with the ecosystem. Love working with MarCloud and our customers, and hopefully some folks who are in the room might be current customers or future customers or even past customers. We'd love to hear from you all. So just keep dropping your comments into the chat. Keep letting us know where you're coming from and keep the questions coming in throughout. We have a principle we kind of live by here where you're not really that much time away from solving a lot of your problems, particularly when you think of Salesforce as a big, massive platform, lots of interesting things to do. The tendency for us to get lost in time as a constraint is pretty clear. We'd like to think we're just a bit skills away. So if we can help in today's session, and as well as that, with a giveaway and or a treat for everybody who stays for the whole hour and absorbs all the content, we'll hope to bridge that gap for you in terms of skills, what you can do with account engagement for your team or for yourself if you're using it in any capacity. With that, Triana, I'll give you the mic and we can get going.
Great. Thank you, Owen. And hello again, everybody. I'm really excited to be presenting to you all, and thank you all for taking your time to join us today. So yeah, we're going to be going through how to plan and build engagement studio programs for events. And before I get into the content, I will just do a very brief introduction of myself. So my name is Triana Jarman. I am one of the senior lead consultants here at MarCloud. My background is very much a B2B marketing one. It's where I started my career before transitioning into consulting, which I've been doing since 2018. I have been a marketing champion since 2021. I love cats, really all animals, but I do have a soft spot for cats. I love my son even more though. And I enjoy running, baking, and using GIFs. So you might see a few of them dotted out throughout this presentation. So we're planning an event. We are going to be hosting a webinar, to say specifically, and we want to leverage account engagement to drive registrations, to keep people engaged before and also after our webinar. So we're going to need a couple of things to make sure we have everything set up before we to say push play on anything. First is that we need an engagement studio plan. What exactly do we want to have happen? We're going to need a CRM campaign. It is very much the crux of kind of pulling everything together between account engagement and Salesforce. We will need account engagement assets created, and then we will be building engagement studios in our case. And of course, we want to be able to demonstrate that our marketing activity is, resulting in a positive kind of results for the business. So we're going to have some reports as well. So I will be talking through kind of each of these. My intention is that initially I will just be doing kind of some slides and explaining a few things in that regard. And then we will be doing a slight live-ish demo towards the end. So, and if you have questions, please drop them into the chat as we go throughout. I don't know that I'll necessarily answer them throughout the presentation, but we'll certainly try to get to them at least at the end. So for planning our engagement studio, we want to make sure that we, first of all, know what our objective and measure of success is. So in this case, we are trying to drive event registrations, but also attendance, which is, incredibly important. So making sure that whatever, this should be probably the objective for, I would say, most webinars, but if you also have extra measures of success that you're trying to do for within your kind of campaign, make sure you capture that somewhere so that this way you always have that in the back of your mind as you're kind of setting everything up and making sure that you're able to kind of prove those things, those measurements, once you get to the end of things. Data is so important when it comes to running an engagement studio program. I've seen quite a few either slightly fail or maybe even not be able to get off the ground when intended, just because the data wasn't there in the system. It hadn't been kind of thought of before. So write down who your target audience is for your event and where is that data coming from. Is it all living in Engagement Studio, or you're going to be pulling it in from other systems as well? And how is that all going to get there? And also make sure that you have appropriate data points for segmentation. So if you're trying to hone in on a very specific audience, do you have data to kind of be able to do that? And does it exist in the system and against enough records? And also think about who shouldn't be in your nurture. If you are trying to exclude certain people, how are you going to do that? Again, data points. How do you identify those people in account engagement to be able to put them into a suppression list? So yeah, data is incredibly huge to make sure you're targeting the right people. And then in regards to content and actions, think about how many emails that you're going to need for kind of your event promotion, but then also your sort of event warm up, we'll call it. And with events in particular, we are a little bit bound by time, right? Because our event is going to be taking place on a certain date. And so depending on how far in advance we are planning our engagement studio, we might have a month to be able to send emails. So we could do, at least probably 4 emails running up to that. If we're a little bit strapped for time and we're only 2 weeks out, then you're only going to be able to send, maybe just a handful of emails before, without seeming a bit too spammy. So again, figure when you think you're actually going to be able to kind of go live with things and plan out then how many emails that you're going to be able to put in before the event starts. And think about what should happen when a prospect is engaging with the content. Now, again, in excuse me, in an event scenario and with a webinar, firstly, we're just trying to get people to register, right? We really shouldn't be sharing a lot of other content in those emails. It should all be really nice, big, obvious CTAs, register, register, register. And when people do that, we will have a landing page and a form handler, which is adding people to lists, to CRM campaigns, and doing kind of that sort of thing. So you have a form handler, which is handling, those sort of actions. Is there anything else that's needed? Do you need to be assigning a task to sales at all? Does sales need to know that people maybe are signing up, or do you want to do any other things with people as they're doing those sort of engagements? And then also thinking about the email cadence, which again kind of relates really back actually to the number of emails. So if you're able if you have either 4 weeks in advance, 2 weeks in advance, what is going to be a sensible amount of emails and length of time in between, so that you're not going to seem a bit too spammy with what you're sending. And I meant to say this actually before I started on all of that, but it's fine. The image that you can see here on the screen is an example of kind of drawing out what your engagement studio is going to look like. And I strongly recommend that you do this, whether you want to do it digitally. This was done in a program called Lucidchart that we use at MarCloud. You could do it on pen and paper. You could probably even do it in a PowerPoint slide, whatever you can do, but get those ideas, all of these answers to these questions we've just gone through, get them down on paper, because this will help you sort of visualize exactly what this user journey is going to be, where people are coming from, the fact that they fill in a form and what's going to happen there. Okay, the form is doing this, so I don't need Engagement Studio to add people to a campaign perhaps, or I don't need them to be assigned because again, my form is doing that. Or maybe you do need Engagement Studio to do that, right? It all depends on exactly how your setup is going to look. So getting things down on paper really allows you to create a blueprint effectively of not only the engagement studio that you're building, but also all of the other things that you're going to need that surround it. So I'm a real strong advocate of getting out a bit of pen and paper or digital pen and paper and getting those ideas down. And just a few quick tips when it comes to kind of the planning side of things. As I mentioned, sketching out your ideas, thinking about how you can use any existing content. So this would probably be more relevant to when you're getting to kind of the warm up of the webinar. If you have any existing content that you can use, which is relevant to the topic that you're doing, you can share content in that case. You don't always have to be creating fresh content. Score increases are also not always required in Engagement Studio. So if, for example, when we're going to be driving people to register for the event and they do that, we don't necessarily need Engagement Studio to be doing any score increases because our baseline scoring in account engagement will already be handling that, unless if you have a reason that you want to add more, a higher score for somebody who does that. So just bear in mind that anything that you add in Engagement Studio from a score increase perspective, if it's for things that already happen as part of the basic scoring in account engagement, it will be added on top of it. And again, I've said it before, think about the data and what you have available for segmentation. There is a copy feature, which I will hopefully be able to show when we get into the kind of semi-live demo of account engagement, where you can copy steps that are quite repetitive. So this way you can build out, a program pretty quickly, and I'll show what that looks like. There's also a test feature so that you can see how the steps are actually going to execute. I think sometimes the hard thing about account engagement is you put out all your steps and you have, 5-day wait periods, 10-day wait periods, but it sometimes is hard to actually imagine what does that look like for a person who is traveling through. How long would it actually take them to get from beginning to end? So the test feature allows you to kind of play around with different scenarios so you can really see what happens at each step, and then you can make adjustments if something doesn't look right. Don't forget existing customers. Seems obvious, but it sometimes happens. We're so focused on trying to drive maybe new business sometimes that we forget actually that we have, in a pre-existing database that we, should be marketing these things to. So don't forget your existing customers. And in particular for events, and especially with a webinar, know what functions your webinar platform can manage and is going to manage. So a lot of them will do their own autoresponder email. Some of them will even have their own form, and you might be beholden to actually using that instead of an account engagement form. They'll send, kind of reminder emails maybe a few days before, an hour before. So just have an understanding of what that platform can do, and then where does kind of account engagement functionality fit in as well. So this way you're not duplicating any efforts there. And just a little nod to in-person events, make sure that you have an ability to capture attendees. With a webinar, a lot of the platforms will have an automatic way of letting you know, like, hey, these are the people who, actually kind of logged onto the platform and stuck around till the end. So that's very automatic. If you're doing an in-person event, we of course need to have, you're scanning badges, you're having them maybe submit a form upon entry, something like that. But just make sure you can capture those attendees and get them into the system. Okay, so step one was planning everything out. We drew out what our engagement studio is going to be and kind of all the things sort of surrounding it. So now we know exactly all the things we need to set up. And the first thing we need to set up before we even get into account engagement items is our CRM campaign. So with this, there are just a few things I want to call out that you might want to consider. And the first is whether a campaign hierarchy is required, whether you're using that in your system. And if you are, then you just need to be aware of how your campaign, your CRM campaign will kind of fit in appropriately within that hierarchy. You also need to make sure you're considering that your prospects are going to actually be in the CRM for being added to the campaign. And what I mean by this is if you happen to have your account engagement org set up where there is perhaps scoring criteria or any other kind of, I suppose, criteria that people have to meet before you have an automation that would assign them and push them into Salesforce. Is someone who signs up for your webinar, are they going to meet that criteria or will they fall short? And in which case they wouldn't get added to the CRM and they can't be added to the campaign straight away. So bear that in mind if you need to do a kind of a side to say automation to just make sure these people do go straight in and perhaps bypass any other process you have in place that might be required. Or if everyone is kind of going through to Salesforce, then it shouldn't be a problem. The other thing to make sure you're being aware of are campaign member statuses. These are customizable, and I would strongly recommend doing that to say all your campaigns, and especially with one for an event or just to say a webinar, we can use things such as they've been invited, they have registered, they've attended, and you can even get really detailed about not attended and if they're even on demand type of to say leads or prospects as well. So it's a really nice way to be able to almost measure the journey that somebody has taken from that kind of first invited all the way to actually attended.
We've posted a poll in the poll section. Hopefully you all saw it pop up on the screen. If not, just check the interface in front of you. For me, down bottom right, I think it's the same. Do you have a campaign hierarchy? Yes, no, or yes, but not using? Really interesting to know what the mix in the room is. Plenty of customers in Salesforce land use campaign hierarchy, but to limited extent or with friction sometimes. Some people are just not aware that it's there. So tell us what you've got, and we can frame some of the recommendations and or the suggestions later to some of those answers.
Cool. Right. While everybody's answering the poll. So the next step we would do once we've created our CRM campaign is now we can get into building out all the account engagement assets. So there is a little bit of a sensible order of doing this, and I'm not going to say that if you don't do it this way, it's dreadful and your kind of campaign won't work. I'm sure it will, but it just does make sense if you do it in a certain way. So firstly, create some folders in account engagement, because then all the other stuff that you will have to create, emails, forms, your engagement studio, everything else, it always asks you to put it into a folder. And I really hope people are trying to not use the, what is it called? The uncategorized folder, because that's where then everything ends up living and it's uncategorized. And my A-type personality just can't handle that. So I hope you have a folder structure and that you would have some folders set up already so that you can add all of the things that you will need for your campaign. Then you want to build out some lists. The lists are actually going to be important because they will be used for other things as we go along. So start with lists after that. Build your autoresponder email next if you're going to use account engagement and a form to kind of send that. If your webinar platform is doing that, then to an extent you don't need to do this. Then you would start going on to the registration landing page and form. And again, I'm making an assumption here that we're using account engagement for everything, and that may not be the case. If you're having to use the webinar platform, then obviously you would skip this step. Or maybe you're using your own website with an embedded Pardot form handler, right? There's a few different ways this could go. But in any case, just make sure you're kind of doing this next, because our form will have completion actions such as sending an autoresponder email, adding people to a list, and adding to a campaign. And those would be things that we've already set up if we've kind of gone through the order of this tick list. So it just makes it feel a bit nicer when you're doing that. Then we will move on to building out the emails for the actual kind of Engagement Studio programs. In our case, we are going to have two. So there's one where it's all about promoting the webinar to the internal database. So you'll have X amount of emails there, depending on how much you've decided you think you can get out in time before the event. And then you'll have emails that are kind of the event warm-up. So those are types where it's like, hey, meet the speaker. This is a reminder of the topic. So knowing what you're going to talk about in each of those emails, which again, you can already start mapping out in that drawing we did a few steps before. So it just makes it a little bit easier to already be like, right, I need this many emails. This is what the content will be. There we go. And then once you've done that, you can then start building the engagement studios. It is literally the last thing that you do. There are also other things that you might be using as part of your campaign. So you could be having custom redirects. You might be using these for any social media advertising that you're doing to promote your webinar, and you want some custom redirects, which is great. And hopefully, generally, we're all using some UTMs in our URLs to help give us a bit more insight as to where people are coming from. So if you are going to be using those, it's actually beneficial to create those as soon as possible, especially before certainly building out emails, because you'll want to be using those in emails and things like custom redirects on social platforms. You also have the option of using dynamic content, and this could be in emails if for some reason, again, the way you've structured your engagement studio and maybe your audience type, and maybe if you have kind of a bit of a mixed audience and a certain topic of the webinar is going to be more of interest to this type of person compared to this type of person, then you might want to use dynamic content to just use different hooks. Who knows? Again, there's so many wonderful things that you can do in account engagement to really either make the journey more personable, depending on your audience. Make sure you're remembering to upload files. I mean, you'll come to a head with this anyway as you're building things like maybe your email or even your landing page, and you're like, oh, I need that hero image. I want to, have that speaker headshot. So get those into the system. And are there any other automations needed? So you might need to rely on an automation rule to help do any extra things that you want as part of your program. So just kind of, again, because we mapped everything out, hopefully it will be very obvious what you need and what it should be doing. And the actions for the sales team, again, this would hopefully come out as well with when you've mapped everything out. If you need to be creating, kind of actions within the engagement studio for kind of like assigning tasks or anything else that alert the sales team to activity that is going on, make sure that you're remembering to include those. Cool. So before I get to the next part, I do just want to make a nice little nod to UTMs because they are a favorite of mine. I've done talks on this before, and so if you are looking for more in-depth information about UTMs, we can point later to you to some of the content on our website and other previous actually to say webinars and talks that I've done on this. But as a very brief nod, for those of you who are using UTMs, you're aware that this is adding that extra layer of insight into campaign activity of where people are coming from. And so if you are using those, make sure you're listing out all of your campaign URLs and then building out the appropriate UTM parameters for each. I find a spreadsheet is very handy for this to just keep things organized. And remember, we're not just thinking about account engagement here. I mean, that's what I know we're talking about, but let's be holistic. We're going to be promoting this webinar on, LinkedIn. Maybe we're going to be running some paid Google ads. So think of all of those things and make sure, we're making the URLs for our event landing page to cover, everywhere that we're promoting our event to. And equally, we have to make sure that we've got those appropriate conversion points to actually capture the UTM parameters. It's not just enough to have them sitting in the URL, and it's only going to maybe be beneficial otherwise if you are pointing people to your own website and you have Google Analytics running, and you could see it in Google Analytics, but to really leverage UTM parameters in kind of a very detailed way between Pardot and between account engagement and Salesforce, then we can actually be capturing those values on those records, appending them to campaign member records so that we can really see at that campaign level where people came from for our campaigns. So, but you need to have that conversion point, which ideally is a form, an account engagement form, a form handler. Otherwise, you are maybe looking at extra kind of, I would say, set up to try to get any UTM parameters into the system correctly. Test that your campaign members are tracking UTMs. So again, if you've got that end-to-end setup of someone getting being a prospect and having UTMs and that following through to them, their campaign member record, just test it out before you go to really make sure it is all working properly. And a very brief thing here, because I've seen it a few times before, and I'm not a huge fan, is to not use completion actions on your forms or form handlers to apply UTMs. That's not how they work. UTMs need to be showing kind of like fluidly where people have come from to get to that page. And unless if you know that your page is only being promoted through one channel, it's very hard to kind of be hard coding, so to speak, your UTMs in. So I would really avoid doing that. And the last thing I'll say is that if you aren't using UTMs, it's okay. You're not a bad person. You can be using child-specific campaigns instead to track, where people are coming from. It requires a little bit of extra setup, but it's perfectly feasible to do, and a lot of people do it as well.
We have
All
a
right.
little poll going. Are you capturing UTMs and can attribute them for each campaign touch point? Surprisingly, if I'm honest, the winning or the leading question so far is UTM who? As in, probably not using UTMs. We've got 35% currently capturing UTMs, but not consistently, and almost 20% or only 20% saying yes, we're solid. So get your answers in. Let us know how au fait you are with UTMs. And again, we can layer in some of the UTM parameter work into the demo if it can be highlighted more frequently, and or we can emphasize the value to make a case for you to start using them. That would be something we can offer today as well. Back to you, Triana.
Yeah, no problem. Yes, we'll definitely share some of the other UTM content we have for those of you who are in the UTM who category, which is fine. So we are now at the stage. We've set up all of our account engagement assets. We're ready now to build out our engagement studios. So as I mentioned before, in our kind of scenario here, we want 2 engagement studios. The first one is to be promoting the webinar, and where the goal there is to drive registrations. And then our second engagement studio is going to be warming up registrants. So people who have registered, we just want to make sure that they're not registered and left alone, twiddling their thumbs, possibly forgetting about our event. We want to make sure that they are still engaged and still just getting those kind of softly little reminders of like, oh yes, I've got an event coming up that I need to attend. We can also use that warm-up registration engagement studio to do some post-event steps as well. In theory, you could make a third engagement studio if you really wanted to, but in this scenario, the way I'll be showing it is we can just use that one to cover both ends of the spectrum. And I'll also be showing just a few fun features that we would maybe want to use in our engagement studio is our wait times for sending emails, and also sending emails on a specific date, which will definitely be more relevant in the case of hosting an event. I just have a few extra tips, and these ones actually apply more for when you're actually building Engagement Studio. Just always bear in mind that with the adding and removing of prospects is that you have suppression lists to be able to kind of move people off, and they could also be added back in depending on how you use that. So when you're building out your program, and if there's people you definitely don't want in ever, that can be a static suppression list. If you need people to potentially move in and out, not sure why, but then you would be using a dynamic suppression list, because a dynamic list, as hopefully most of us know, that matches prospects based on criteria and automatically either adds them to the list or takes them off. And so if you're using a dynamic list as a suppression list, keep in mind that they will only be suppressed from the program when they're on that list. As soon as they don't match that criteria for that dynamic list, they will come off of that suppression list and they will start running through your program. So just keep that in mind. These programs have a limit of 300 steps. I can't possibly imagine a webinar that needs 300 steps for kind of promotion. If it does, I mean, that's amazing. I'd love to see that. So, but yes, there's a limit to the number of steps you can have, but I don't think anyone here will probably be in trouble of reaching that. When you pause the nurture to make amends, don't leave it paused for too long, because this actually affects wait times when you push play again. So if you're kind of in the morning, you're like, oh, I need to change something, and you pause the program, but you don't actually start the program till end of the day, or even even a few hours away, that has an impact of when people will continue moving through the program. So if you know you've got changes to make, try to kind of do them as, pause, make the change, set play again. So it's literally just a few minutes of you having to have made changes. And be mindful of form versus landing page trigger. And again, this is very much for the scenario of if you are using an account engagement landing page and form together, is that when you do, the landing page is kind of like the parent, and that is where you go for looking at people who have submitted the form. Actually, that data is no longer on the form. The data is held within, to say, the landing page in account engagement. And so when you're using triggers in your engagement studio to like listen for people doing something, you'll want to end up listening for the landing page instead of the form. Okay, so that was a lot of slides. Thank you for bearing with me on that. And I am going to now do a live-ish demo. So there are some things where I've pretty much already set them up, but I do just want to try to take you through very quickly a few things high level. I don't plan to really get into a lot of like, this is exactly how we're going to build something, but I just want to kind of show where things are and just a few little bits. So, and hopefully everything is teed up and we don't have any blue wheels of death to contend with.
Before we kick off in earnest, Triana, I'll just say it's a good time for anybody to get any questions into the chat as you're watching what we're doing on the screen. While we may not be able to or have the facility today to really walk into the depths and the details, we could definitely talk to the problem you might address. So get your questions in. If you have a subject in an area that's on screen, chances are we can get a discussion going that. If it's relevant and if it keeps us on track, fantastic. It'll just give you more value from the session.
Excellent. So I just really quickly wanted to show you Lucidchart. So as I mentioned, this is what we use internally to kind of draw out things, whatever they might be, and in which case certainly use it for planning out engagement studios. So I'm just going to zoom out ever so slightly so you can kind of see at a high level. This is what I've done as an example for my event promotion. So I have people entering the program. There is an action here to add people to the CRM campaign with my custom status of invited. I've decided I can manage 3 emails before this event. And then I'm also going to run a bit of a rule down at the bottom, which is going to check whether people have clicked on the registration link, but they haven't submitted the form. And depending on whether that's a yes or a no, I'm going to send a slightly different email then, maybe with, just kind of a different hook, or, whatever it could be, to try to maybe get the people who already showed interest. What can I do to actually get them to submit that form? So again, by drawing all of these things out, it gives me a really clear idea of what I should be setting up in the system. And same thing with to say the warm-up list. I've done the same thing where I've written out, okay, before the event happens, I can fit in this many emails, and I'm also going to be running this type of action in Engagement Studio based on whether people have actually attended the webinar, to then decide how I send a follow-up email. So the drawing out really helps bring everything to life later on in a much easier way. When we are in account engagement, as I said, first things first, folders. So I have my product launch folder here, and you can see I've just set up for all the things maybe I know that I want to use. I've set up folders even maybe for things I know I don't need yet, but basic area folders, so I can very easily click in and go to things. And actually, what I want to show you even before that, what happens before folders, everybody? Create the CRM campaign. I heard you all say that, even though I know you're all on mute. So let's just take a quick look at that, shall we? So here we go. I've got my product launch webinar, and I need to find the right area. There we go. In this case, I'm showing 2 ways of doing this. I've got some child campaigns here, you can see in my hierarchy, hopefully, and each one is for a different channel. I've got email, LinkedIn, and media partner. So this is just to demonstrate that if you're not using UTMs to capture this, or maybe you're doing a bit of both, right? If you're just, very paranoid and you want to cover all bases, you might do that too. But if you kind of want to capture where people have come from specifically, you would be setting up child campaigns underneath your parent, and then anything you do from an email perspective, people need to be added to this campaign. Compared to LinkedIn, they would be added to this one, and media partners to this one. It does mean you have to set up separate conversion points, or you have to have that mechanism in place to know people who have registered from LinkedIn, they have to go in this campaign. We don't want them coming in the email campaign or the media partner one. So just to show that there. And then campaign member statuses. So with this, I have customize these. As I mentioned before, invited is my default one, just kind of because it makes sense. Someone has been invited. Then registered is a responded status, and I'm ticking this as responded because that's part of my goal. Part of my goal is that I just need to get people to sign up for the webinar. I need to demonstrate how many people have done that. So responded for that is going to be important. But equally, people who have attended is another responded status. That means people were equally still as engaged with the webinar. So I'm going to have 2 responded statuses there. And the connected, this is sadly just a bit of a byproduct of connected campaigns. And I've honestly tried to delete it and it still won't go away. So I'm not using that one, but it's just hanging out there with us. Right, so we have our campaign. We've got folders. We can actually start building stuff. I mentioned before that lists is kind of first calling point, and you can see here, these are like standard lists that you would want, I think, for any event. People who you're going to invite. These are going to be people who are already in your system, by the way. So, all of your existing leads, existing customers, these are people in Pardot who you can add to that program. They are on your invite list. Anything that you're doing in a third-party platform, whether it's LinkedIn organic or paid, Google ads, you're working with a media partner, they're not going to be on this kind of list because you don't know who they are. They are literally going to go straight from being unknown to you to registered. So they're skipping that. The only people on this list are people who are in your database. And then we've got the registration list, obvious, that comes with our form completion action. And then the attendee list will be people who have attended our webinar. And again, if you really needed to add more lists, depending on how you've planned out your program, you can do that. But for me, I just need these 3 right now. I am quickly going to just show the landing page. And so we can see here, I have a form, and I'm only just very briefly going to show the form to also just highlight the UTM side of things and the completion actions as it loads. So I have some UTM fields here. I'm going to zoom in a little bit because I could imagine it might be tiny. I've got UTM fields here. They're hidden fields. And because my Pardot form is going to be embedded on a Pardot landing page, I don't need any special code to pass UTMs from the URL to these hidden fields. It's kind of an inherent what do you want to call it? It's inherently built into the system, which is quite nice. But if you are going to be embedding a Pardot form or form handler into your own website, you do then need some extra JavaScript to kind of help get things from the URL into the hidden fields. And again, something we're very familiar with doing for clients and can support with. So you make sure if you're using UTMs, you don't forget your hidden fields. And as I mentioned before, we've got our completion actions of the autoresponder email. We're assigning to someone so they get into the CRM. I'm adding them to a registration list, and they're also being added to my campaign with a registered campaign member status. So that's that. And if I come back, I've lost myself. There we go. I am quickly going to show the landing page just because it has something a little special that I think a few people were inquiring about, which is a countdown timer to the webinar. I've set this to be October 31st, and so it's 35 days until this webinar. Things like this do not come out of the box with account engagement, sadly. The landing page section is very much something that if you can make it look really amazing and fancy, but it does require coding efforts, which again is something that we've helped a lot of clients with in the past. So yeah, so just wanted to show that briefly for a few people who were interested interested in things like that. Right. So there's my other landing page. Let's get into some of the Engagement Studio side of things. So zoom out a little bit. Because I've already got my plan that I drew out before, I know kind of exactly how this thing should be built. I shouldn't really have to think too hard about it. I know exactly who the folder, for one, that I'm putting it in. I know exactly who the recipient lists are. They are my invites. And my suppression lists, I want to suppress people who register. That kind of makes sense. If there were other people I wanted to suppress, then we could do that as well. The first thing that I'm doing in this particular engagement studio is I am going to add these people who, again, they're the internal database people, going to add them to our Salesforce campaign with that invited status. So that will happen first things first. If I was concerned about any of them actually being assigned, and again, they have to be assigned and in Salesforce even to get to the campaign, I could always add a step beforehand that actually checks, assignment status, like, are they assigned? And if they, excuse me, if they're assigned, and if they are, then great. If not, then I need to add in a step to get them assigned so that they would actually get into the Salesforce campaign. So again, little things that you might have to think of if you notice that your invite list has people who aren't assigned and aren't in the CRM. And then sending our email. And again, our email is very much just about register for the webinar, not a whole lot of other content going on. And realistically, I would say you don't necessarily need to be monitoring those link clicks too much, or need to know that people have submitted the form, because again, when people submit the form handler completion actions are doing all that work for you of adding to CRM campaign, sending autoresponder, etc. But if you did want to listen out for people who have clicked on the link, which if you remember, I said that I did want to listen out for people who clicked on the link and then didn't register. So I am going to add this step here, which is I'm listening out for the email link click, and I would pick a specific link that's in my email, and I'm going to wait a certain amount of days. And the days I'm going to wait actually is going to be the amount of days in between the email sends. So it's going to wait these 5 days. It'll check if people have clicked on that registration link. If they haven't, no problem. They're just going to get the next email. And if they have, all that's actually going to happen is they will be added to a list. So this would be a list that I would call, clicked on reg form, didn't register, whatever it would be. And that's all that's going to happen because, again, they haven't registered, so I still need them to get the emails, but I want to track at each email engagement whether someone has clicked. So that's what's going to happen here. And because I know that this is going to be a repetitive step that's going to happen for, let's say if I've got 4 emails ahead of the event, what I can do is I can click select up here, and all of my steps in my program will now have this little orange circle, as you can see, hopefully, and I can click on them, the ones that I want, and I can copy, and then I can come down to where I need those steps to kind of repeat, and I can just paste in the steps from my board. Oh, look at that. How mean. But anyway, it does work. I have did it before. But basically, you can see my program just has this cluster of repetitive steps going on, and I can very easily build those out by using that step. You do have to go into each one and just make sure that the email that is being sent, or the email link click URL that is being looked at is the correct one. So just you have to go into each step and maybe customize them. But it's very handy for building out things fast. And as I mentioned, I'm going to use then a rule at the end before I send my very last email to check, is someone on my, on my link click list? And if they are, I'm going to send them a particular email. And by the way, I know that they haven't registered at this point for the webinar because those people are on my suppression list. And so anyone who has registered for the event, they can't get to this stage at this point. If you did want to be really sure of yourself to know that your looking at people who clicked the link but didn't register, again, you could add another step here to check on that list as well to make sure it's not people who have registered. Lots of different ways you can do this sort of stuff. But yeah, this email I'm going to be sending with a slightly different maybe tone. It's coming from someone else. And then this one as well is going to just, still promote the webinar, but, just not maybe with the exact same content. You could also look at doing something like this with dynamic content potentially, as long as you have a field though for the dynamic content to reference. In this case, I don't, I just have the list. So sending 2 separate emails makes sense for me. I'm also going to make sure that these last emails are sent on a specific date. You'll notice that I've picked 2 days before my October 31st webinar because I don't want them necessarily to go out anytime beyond that. So in this case, I want to use the email date. If anyone reaches this step past the 29th, they won't get these emails. They'll just reach the end. So it's using this kind of step, again, in an event scenario where we have a cutoff point, is a good way to make sure they don't get emails past the time they shouldn't. Equally, I would pause this kind of program that is promoting an event at least a few hours probably before your event actually starts, again, just so people who are maybe further up the program for some reason, if you have people coming in a bit late, that they're not going to be getting an email like as the event is happening or past the event date. Right, I am conscious of the
Can I
time, so
throw a quick scenario at you,
you
Triana?
may. Yes.
4 forms with hidden fields in landing pages. I'm trying to interpret a question here and just get back to the context. But if we use a landing page to house forms and want to pass other hidden info like hidden fields, will it automatically do that?
No, I don't believe so. I think it is. I could be wrong. Let's actually, I shouldn't be so sure of that. But in the scenario where you're using the account engagement landing page and form and you have other hidden fields connected, I don't know that it would automatically send that. I feel like it's inherent only to the UTMs, but I've never actually tested it. So I will take that one to the side and investigate and come back to you.
Cool,
It's a good
Alison.
question.
Hopefully we can have a conversation about that. It sounds really interesting.
Yeah. Excellent. Right. And then very briefly, the warm-up engagement studio, very similar to the other one, except for that in this case, because we're just warming up for the webinar, and I might be sharing some content, like I said, it's a meet the speaker, or you're sharing maybe a blog relevant to content that you're sharing. If you want to be looking out for those link clicks, then you would add similar steps before. And depending on what you want to do, you're adding people to a list. You maybe want to let sales know. It all depends, but you can be adding those steps in. But I would say for the most part, your key thing about these warm-up emails is you just want to keep people reminded of the fact that they've signed up for a webinar, because some people could be signing up a month in advance, depending how early you've started your program. Or even if it's 2 weeks, we're all very busy. We can't remember everything. So this just helps to keep the event top of mind. To which, using again the sending of the email on a specific date will really help, because you don't know exactly when people are going to get into this program. And what you wouldn't want to have happen is that somebody signs up for your webinar 2 weeks out, and they kind of get to this email and they have to go through. And if you set these to send like every 7 days and you had more than 2 emails, they would never get to kind of like the final email in your cadence at the right time. So by sending these emails on specific dates, if someone comes in after that date, they don't get that email, they go straight to the next one. And even if they're signing up super late, like the day of or the day before, then they just miss those emails, and that's fine. Again, as long as you've worked out in your plan that either account engagement or your webinar platform is sending at least that email, 24 hours ahead, a few hours ahead, they'll get some kind of communication. So I wouldn't worry too much about them missing on these things. The other thing I just wanted to share is
Second
oh, sorry,
question,
go ahead.
if you
Yeah,
don't
go
mind.
for it. No, not at all.
In the instance of a kind of max capacity or limited capacity event, how would we imagine is a good way to connect that to the engagement journey?
That is
When
a
capacity
fantastic
is
question.
reached, we'd want to stop or stall, perhaps, maybe even change, bring people into a wait list variation, be my idea. But How do we handle that?
You could do so. Again, we have to think of the wider picture here. So where we're promoting our event here to our known database of sign up for webinar, and we've got quite a few emails. If by the time we're getting, towards email, like towards the end of this program and it's already filling up, I would say maybe pause the program entirely just to stop that promotion from happening. People have already received maybe X amount of emails from beforehand anyway. So if they were interested and they click back on an old email and try to register and it says, sorry, there's no more space. I mean, that's, it's not like you sent them the email that day and they said there's no space. That looks bad. But if they're clicking on an email from 2 weeks ago and it says there's no space, that's on them. Equally, if you're running ads, again, Google ads, LinkedIn, anything like that, you can only control, once stuff is out there, it's out there. But as long as you maybe would stop any promotional activity at the point that we're starting to fill up, we need to maybe slow down a bit. You just need to kind of put a pause on everything because there will still be content floating around out there anyway for people to engage with. I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, it may be that doesn't need to be a technical situation to be resolved. It's more of a operational. It's quite simply hold the focus and stop. It doesn't have to be, unless we wanted it to build some technical background to it. Sometimes we can overcomplicate.
Yeah, I don't think it has to be technical. It's just, I suppose it's, think of any kind of event, that we're used to, not even just a webinar, but if something is starting to fill up, you maybe just, you slow down promotion, you stop promotion, and just kind of let any of the kind of stragglers kind of like come through the door. And if you notice the day before you still have space, then you do a final push, but you kind of make that judgment call of, okay, we're happy with this number. We've still got X amount of spaces left, and we'll wait until maybe a few days before to just say, hey, there's still this much space left. With the warm-up webinar, again, we would want to then maybe send an email right before the event. And again, our event is happening on October 31st. So I've got this email sending the day before, October 30th. And then I have a wait here, waiting 2 days. So it'll wait for the day after the webinar, November 1st, to see if people are on our product launch webinar attendee list. And if they are on that list, then I'm adding them back into our, adding into our campaign with the status now of attended. So that's going to change that status there. And I'm going to send them, a kind of a thank you email, or again, maybe the webinar platform has already sent the thank you email, but then this is an extra one just to say, hey, we hope you enjoyed this session. Maybe here's the deck now, or, here's an extra follow-up as needed. And again, for people then who aren't on that list, it means they registered, but they just didn't attend. So they get the, sorry, we missed you email. But you can use Engagement Studio to do that. Again, as long as you have everything set up in place so that this kind of list is populated appropriately within the time frame that you're allowing to then send these kind of emails out. Right. Conscious of time, and that I just need to then I need to talk a little bit about the reporting side of things. Now, with this, I'm not necessarily going to be doing the live demo because reports are inherently slow to load sometimes, and I just don't want a lot of blue screen of death. So I've got slides on this, but again, happy to, if we have time, answer questions and maybe show things if possible. But when you're reporting on your event success, you've got 3 options. You can use Account Engagement, you can use Sales Cloud, and you can use B2BMA. So very quickly to go through what that sort of looks like in each one. Within Account Engagement, you can look at the emails themselves. So if you're having to do that level of reporting to see, with each of the emails you've sent, what the engagement has been, which ones are getting more clicks than others, you can look at your email template statistics, see kind of those high level details there. And you can also go into the email itself to get kind of a bit more on like the delivery rate and the HTML rates and things like that. And then the other type of reporting you can do in Account Engagement is at the Engagement Studio level. So if you are interested in how the Engagement Studio performed, maybe if you have a few more complicated steps and you want to see what has happened along the way, there is a report tab, which will show these black little kind of boxes here that tells you the breakdown of people, the percentage of people who started your program, where they ended up going. You can also, from within the Engagement Studio report, export a spreadsheet that will show you all of the emails from your program with those delivery rate, unique open rates, etc. information. So if you didn't want to look at it one by one, like the way I had before in the previous slide, you can export this, and it's not the prettiest spreadsheet in the world, but the data is at least all there, already collected for you, and you could always make it look a little nicer. Did I skip something? No, sorry. Right. In Sales Cloud, we start to get better reporting. I will, say that it's just allows you to get a bit more of a holistic view, not just maybe of how your emails performed, because you can do those kind of reports in Sales Cloud. I'll show in a second, but you start to look more at the campaign level, and then also at kind of revenue level with opportunities. So this report is a campaign with campaign member report. This would be one where you can demonstrate, okay, 100 people signed up for my webinar, and because I used the custom campaign member status, I can actually say that out of or you say 100 people are in my campaign, and I can see that 75 people have the member status of registered, and 25 people have the status of invited. And of course, then once you've had your event, you will hopefully see some of those statuses change to attended. So you really get a good breakdown of, out of all the people who have engaged with your event, what, kind of where do they lie in that journey. If you're using UTMs as well, this is another place where you could, and again, this works with the solution of having those UTMs appended to the campaign member record, which I do recommend. You can then start to filter also on, like, okay, of all these people who've engaged with our campaign, where did they come from? Was my paid social referral or just social organic? Which one performed the best, and across exactly which source? So really insightful data to show you where your marketing efforts are kind of yielding the right sort of results. You've also then got a campaigns with influenced opportunities report type. This is now where you get to start demonstrating back to the business that, hey, people who were in our product launch webinar, that kind of highlighted down over here in blue, I can see that there's £52,000 worth of opportunities that are attributed to people from that campaign. So with campaign influence, as marketers, we can say, like, look, these campaigns we're running, we are influencing these opportunities as well. And campaign influence is a whole other little bag of stuff to unpack, and maybe we'll do that in a future webinar if people are interested. But it's a really important, I think, tool to use for marketing to really demonstrate to the business the value that it's bringing back in. And I mentioned before that you can actually report on Pardot account engagement emails within Sales Cloud. So there are custom report types that you can create that allow you to do this. And again, you can get pretty much all the sort of email statistics that you would expect, but now you can do it in Sales Cloud as well. So just something to make people aware of. And if you need information on that, there is like a Salesforce link we can share, which describes exactly how to set those up. And of course, you've got Sales Cloud dashboards where you can take those reports and you can put them in together as something, really insightful to share with the business and to share with your leadership teams on how marketing and events are performing. B2B MA, not to give it any kind of like less attention, but the out-of-the-box dashboards that you get, which are 5 of them, I would say the 2 that you would use for reporting would be this multi-touch attribution dashboard, which again connects to the campaign influence reporting that we just saw before. And then also this engagement dashboard, which drills into your email templates and your forms. And there's also landing pages as well. I just couldn't capture. I would say the limitation with B2B MA, though, is just that the out-of-the-box dashboards, you might find that they don't capture the data exactly as you want and aren't maybe just customized enough to your business, because they very much are an out-of-the-box, assuming a one-size-fits-all, which isn't always the case. And so if you are interested or looking for customized dashboards, that's something that MarCloud has helped a lot of clients with. And I think really when you get into customized B2B MA, then they start to kind of prove quite useful. Right.
Interestingly, just on our last poll,
Yes.
and I'll call it out, we've got a 1-minute warning. I won't take too much time. Which method of reporting do you prefer? Sales Cloud, 53% now. Pardot, Account Engagement, 41, B2BMA lagging around 10 or 11%. So get your votes in, let us know where you're reporting. And again, we'd love to talk more about different variations in how to report. Because one thing Salesforce does very well is report, but how and what you need for your business, to Triana's point, is quite custom.
Yeah. Right. We are nearing the end. I can't believe I took up that whole hour. So just very quickly, key takeaways. Planning is super essential, as described. You need to set up items. Well, you don't need to. Setting up items in a logical order is helpful. Consider your external platforms that you're using and how that all is going to fit into your engagement studio and plan. Test everything, right? Just test all the time to make sure it's working. Know what those measures of success are so that you are capturing data points to be able to prove that by the end of your event, and use an appropriate reporting tool, whichever one is going to work for you. And that is it. We've gone through some questions, and before people